Welcome everyone to our community call for March. I'm here with Zhenya Novareign, and I'm so excited and delighted and honored to speak with you. We've had this beautiful journey online, but I feel like our hearts are really connected. And I know that your ancestry comes from Ukraine, and given what's happening in the world, your shares and the way you've showed up with this tender conversation has really been so inspiring. So I want to hand this space to you, my love, and just hear what's on your heart today.
Mm, Thank you. Thank you so much. I felt called right away when you shared my name, Zhenya Novareign, to actually out myself because I was born. My full name, before I changed it legally, is Yevgenia Vasilyevna Novgorodskaya. So I just wanted to share my real name and both of my family, both sides of my family are from Ukraine. I recently found out that my grandfather also comes from Poland. So yeah, it's been a potent time, and I guess as I enter the space, I think that this has been an opportunity for me to also recognize and acknowledge that there's been genocide happening to all different kinds of peoples throughout the past, throughout the millennia, like the past many years. And so there's so much, that's up for me. It's not the first time that genocide has happened in Ukraine either. And so it's just really been an opportunity to ask myself, how does my work, how does my how can I be of service to greater peace, to greater understanding, um, of greater honoring? And so, anyway, just like when a good friend passes away or something traumatic happens in our lives, somehow all the things that aren't important get stripped away, and what's left is just our heart and our grief that tends to just reveal what's most important. And so that's what I've been feeling a lot in the last few weeks.
Mm. Thank you for sharing your name
Mhm.
and all the power behind that. I'm reminded so much of, my own journey and other people's journeys, and just sometimes when we reclaim these pieces of our ancestry because the world hadn't allowed it up until that point. And so
Mhm.
there's so much here. Just to give context, you're an Arvigo therapist, but you also do lots of other work. And I think that introducing the way you live your life is important in giving a container to the subject matter. Because in terms of the
Mm.
pelvic bowl and in terms of the body, you mentioned the word genocide and the horrors and traumas we carry as a species. I mean, this is the content. This is the pain we're all carrying for Ukraine, for Palestine, for Syria, for Yemen. That's some of my ancestry in Yemen as well. For everyone, known and unknown, spoken and unspoken, state sanctioned compassion or not. We live in a species that hurts. And so tell me about what you do and how it's related to this moment in time.
Mm. Thank you. It's interesting how, our answers to questions like evolve and change, as we change and grow. And in this moment, I'm reminded that like our meeting came to me um, during a really deep transition in my life. And I was really looking to reconnect with the Arvigo community. Um, and so I've been an Arvigo therapist for, I think, since like about 2014 or something like that. Or that's when I started my self care journey, right? So, but my whole, adult life has been this, this, I think, path of remembrance. And it really started, with the work of the Maya teachings, even before our Vigo. And and so I started out really learning about holistic health and how to use food as medicine. And as I kind of migrated from New York, I was born in Ukraine, my family migrated to New York. And then after I really kind of became exposed to, East Indian medicine, like of yoga. And then I moved to New Mexico and really started to study the healing arts. And in that journey, I actually visited the Maya lands. And so a lot of my journey has been, connected to these medicines of Central America and North America. And what I didn't know at that time when I was really young is that I was remembering myself home, is like what I like to say, because um, I've throughout this process been examining, like, how do I come into right relationship and have integrity in my work as someone who does, who practices healing modalities. And as I've, learned these different modalities, they've actually brought me more back to my own culture. And so, I practice Arvigo, I practice a lot of other healing traditions that come from uh, what I would say is, like, the Turtle Island, as well as just like the Mexica culture. And the more that I've learned about my own culture, the more that I've actually found these healing modalities actually do come from my own culture as well. And I'll share just like a little tidbit. When we first met, I was starting the spiritual healing training, and I was getting this information. I've actually been working on this painting of a woman who I saw her picture, and I just felt so called to her. I just was like lovingly referring to her as my Ukrainian grandmother, because I've never really had a close relationship with my grandmothers. And I think she started to communicate to me, and I actually found out who she was. And um, I found out that the elders are often referred to as the whisperers, and that they whisper prayers into our bodies and into our skin, and they work with plants and prayers and the whispers. And so, that's, of course, that's what we do in spiritual healing. And so this, I feel like my life has just been this journey of remembrance, like through the textiles. Like, I'm wearing this Ukrainian wrap, but it's actually, the funny thing is that this came from Albuquerque, because I couldn't order any from Ukraine, and the native tribes, the especially the elders of native tribes, they have a very strong relationship with the Ukrainian immigrants that are in America. They have a history together, and so the native women wear these wraps. And so it's just another way that these, that this medicine work has led me to really understanding my roots, and how medicine was, how we've practiced medicine in the past. So of course, with that work, there's like this trauma piece, right? Like, how do we use these practices not just to heal the physical, but to heal these deep, um, wounds that we carry, that come from, oftentimes, when I'm working with clients, I'm like, hey, let's explore how much of this is coming from before before you were even born, right? Like, epigenetically, our genetics. And so, I just feel really called in to, you know yeah, we're healing many generations through prayer, through body work, through dance, what all these different modalities. So that's a little bit about what I do. More recently, I've kind of ventured more into coaching and sensuality work. So again, it's like, right, the pelvic bowl, like, we as a therapist who's worked on the abdominal area for a long time, it's really cool being here in Taos. We're offering a training right now, and I'm looking at all of the ligaments, and how they're also connected to our whole pelvic bowl, right? Like, so I feel like I'm getting this integration piece too, of how to work with the sexual trauma also. That's kind of this natural evolution that's coming through for me right now, which I know you do that work as well, because I know you work with Tammy Kent's work as well. um,
Yeah.
that's a little bit about what I do. I'm happy to answer more, because I know I'm kind of going in and out here, in and
Oh,
out.
it's
There's a lot.
perfect. I mean, you're reading the field and you're feeling the energetic waves, and it's a complex conversation that we're approaching with words, when it's really so much deeper than words. And the thing that like I've been dancing in since you spoke was about the elders being the whisperers. And I had this like full on memory of being on my mother's bed and being really little and her taking my pulse points and whispering prayers into them in her own language, which is exactly what Rosita taught us all to do, that Donna Lehio taught her to do. And it's this, again, we talked about this in spiritual healing, but this species imperative in that our healings are at their core very similar, and our wounds are at their core very similar, and yet so much of the like horror that we're witnessing is separation. It's like, you are XYZ, therefore this needs to happen to you, or whatever it is. And it's just like, what the challenge, we've talked about this so much, is like, how do I keep my heart open when I look at this much pain and this much violence and this much aggression? And so how do you keep your heart open, honey?
Oh my God. I have a really strong practice of like feeling the whole spectrum of feelings. And so I really try not to override, like when I'm feeling depressed and tired, I take that time and take that space to feel what's coming through. But at the same time, I've also actively given myself permission to feel the whole spectrum of emotions. Like I can feel grief and I can feel like debilitating sickness, like from what I'm seeing and what I'm experiencing. And then I can still experience joy. I can still experience awe. And as a matter of fact, you actually said something so beautiful, which I hope I wish I could quote verbatim, but you said that keeping your heart open, during these times is an act of resistance. And I think that's a big part of my practice is coming back to prayer and coming back to action. Something about, having a prayer practice for me, it broadens me outside of this, very limited, lens of this physical reality. And it allows me to feel like a greater sense of support, a greater sense of connection to everyone and everything in the world. And so it can take me out of that, hyper focus on that grief or the fear, and even, stretches me to maybe experience pleasure of like being alive, being a vital, being safe. I think, there's also this like gratitude that comes through and you're like, wow, like, in juxtaposition to like what some people may be experiencing, just even being alive. I also, what's been coming through a lot is, everyone's heard of the four agreements. Many people have heard of the four agreements. And I've always said that my favorite agreement is the fifth agreement, which is kind of like the secret one at the end of the book. If you haven't read the book, this is like a spoiler alert, but it's the initiation of death. And, he says that Paulo Coelho, he says that when you live every day like it can be your last, you're going to think twice how you're going to spend your day, what you're going to say, how you're going to live. And so I think that kind of, it's a big practice for me. It's like I try and really just do my best, and sometimes, I'm going to take the time and just rest and just sleep, and just cry, just break down a little bit. um just ask for help, right? Because sometimes like I'm not resourced enough to know that I need to grab something and pray with it, or um and it's interesting because this thing in Ukraine happened about, it's been like almost 3 weeks or something, and I've been here in Taos for 2 weeks. And so when I arrived to teach the professional care training, or to assist for the professional care training, I was definitely depleted, right? Like I was even at some point was like feeling self-conscious. I had to tell Kathleen, like, I'm feeling like, like not quite 100%. And through the practice of being in service, through the practice of doing the prayers every day, to the practice of showing up in beauty, in celebration, in prayer, and in ritual, I started to feel like I was coming back to myself again. And so yeah, it's that coming home. It's that coming home, over and over again, just like when you're driving, right? And you're like, because the driving in Taos is so trippy for me. I'm like, oh, wrong turn, because I kind of, like I'm still getting to know it. But it has this coyote medicine. I'm always going like this all around. And I just, I'm like, oh, I'll find my way. I just go here. And, if you get stressed out and you're like, oh shit, my phone's dead. Where am I? Like, you can have a pretty funky experience. But if you just trust, right? And you're like, no, I'm good. I got this. You're going to keep going. You're going to find your way. And so that's what I've been doing, to keep my heart open. And um, I think more recently, because I don't really consider myself much of an activist, or I haven't so much in the past. Like I've always felt pretty strongly about, being counterculture. But, I've heard a lot of people say there's different parts of being of service. And I feel like mine has always been kind of in the healing arts realm. But I think more recently, I feel like it's important also to be like, how can my privilege, my um, accessibility, my resources, like how can I like contribute and give back and be a part of causes that are working to change. So that's something that's shifting for me. Like I'm beginning to be like, okay, I'm more resourced than I have been in my life. I'm older than I've ever been. And so now it's like that service component. And that's like, what came to me in the meditation I was doing. It was like, it's time now to give back for everything that I've been given. So I really feel that service component is coming through now as a part of keeping sane and open.
Yeah, it's huge. I mean, there's so much to unpack in what you've just shared, and I just am taken repeatedly to this piece around if I stay with the full spectrum of my emotions, even in the deepest grief and all the accompanying rage, sadness, whatever might be flowing, in the face of witnessing horror, maybe there's even pleasure. And so my energy immediately went a little further into that. And this can be a little bit of it's like an edgy conversation. And when I say that, I'm like, it's not edgy for me, but I'm feeling like society's edge, right? And
Mhm.
it's often in the realms of pleasure that we experience the truth. And that's why so many times people cry during orgasm or have rage come up or go into whatever because there's a moment where you open to whatever's there. And I think it's interesting because this speaks to a much bigger issue. And that is our deadening and our desensitization and our dissociativeness as society, and what happens to us when we're allowed to be horrified. But if we really let ourselves look, the shadow is always at play in society. And so it's so curious when these peak moments happen. I'd love to, I know you've shared about this. I'd love to just hear more. How do you reconcile it when it's with your community, but you know it's happening all the time?
Hmm. How do I reconcile it? Yeah, I want to be clear. I understand your question because I get the pleasure piece, and that just kind of resonates with me. But yeah, ask me again.
So sometimes this is, I'll just share rather than ask a question. It's like when I'm in an orgasmic space,
Hmm.
sometimes I feel the worst pain of, like, I can feel the most grief that I've suppressed in my daily life because I just have to get through things. And I don't always believe that the people around me have the capacity to hold what I'm experiencing, but I'm so activated to my own heart that I can't not let go. And so in that space, I think maybe we've had this conversation, but I'd love to share it with you. It actually is an our Vigo conversation. Once
Yeah.
I was inspired to do self-care prior to having intercourse. And in that experience, I had a heart orgasm for the first time. And I've never been able to replicate that, but it's like imagine the physical sensation of a cervical orgasm happening in your chest.
Ooh.
It's very hard to explain in words, but from that moment for about 20 minutes, I couldn't separate myself from all of life. It's like I just felt empathy for everything. And I think we microdose on this when we come into contact with our own bodies, and then we go back into the world and we're not allowed to have that level of compassion.
Right.
And so I recognize it in your posts about Ukraine's important and everyone else is important. It's like you're pushing the boundary of the compassion we're almost allowed to speak about. You know, you brought up themes around racism and it's intertwining into this conversation. And it's
Mhm.
like certain cultures we might be allowed to have more empathy for from this perspective or not. It doesn't even really matter as much as the deeper wound, I think. It's like if we were to just rip the band-aid off that. I've been thinking a lot about your post where you said Ukrainian, Palestinian, what's the difference? It's not really a difference, you know, really, when we get
No.
down to it. But I was like, okay, compassionately, what's the difference? And I'm like, well, people probably, when something happens to someone who looks more like them or comes from a similar background to them, just organically, cellularly, it's harder to look away because we're animals. And it's like, that's my species, that's my tribe, that's my whatever. But then there are many of us who go past that and go, wait, like that person, that being's alive too. So how come it's okay here and it's not okay there? And I'm just curious, like, how do you navigate that? Because it's so loaded, man. Like, that is just, it's such a loaded question. And there's so much
Yeah.
taboo still. So take it away.
Sure. Well, there's a huge intersection between, how racism lives inside of us. It lives inside of our bones. And one example I can use is that you see hints of this in our language. Like when I grew up speaking Russian because Ukraine was, colonized by the Soviets a long time ago. And so my mom's generation had to speak Russian. And so the growing up, there were little racial slurs that were kind of like jokes and like little things you would say kind of when you're picking on someone. And I remember, and I don't want to repeat them here because I don't think, that's necessary. But at some point, I remember being in college and I found this. It was like a poster that was, I wish I still had it. It was amazing. It was like a poster that was in a National Geographic. It was huge. It like folded out and it had it had a picture of the former Soviet Union, and it had a photograph, like a photo representation of the different tribes that were like considered Russian, right? And there was a tribe that that I was like, oh, I recognize that word. My mom used to use that word with like this not Russian guy. And it was kind of this like running joke. Like if you weren't like, if you didn't look a certain way, you were like not quite bright, or you had this issue. And so I feel like I felt those things in my body. Like when I started to understand, there were certain things my mom would say or I would hear or like see in the community that made me feel uncomfortable. I was like, this doesn't feel right. And then I kind of started to put together like, no, this really doesn't feel right. And so what's been so interesting about, part of the reason why people have so much compassion for what's happening in Ukraine is that they're seeing it televised, like it's in the media, whereas things that are happening in Somalia and Yemen and Palestine, like we just see these little snippets, but it's the same exact thing. Like schools and museums and places of worship have been destroyed in these other countries. And there's this weird idea that European people, white people, are more civilized. And that's the reality that I think that many of us like realize, like, of course that's not true, but somewhere that lives in our body. And just like that lives in our body, so does oppression of our sexuality. Like if we think about the puritanical cultures, right? And like what they tried to, oh, this is perfect because we just experienced St. Patrick's Day, where all the snakes were exterminated or whatever from Ireland. and that were like, those were like the pagan people that were the medicine keepers and the women and the, and the midwives and the herbalists. And so we've all been through this robbing of our culture and our roots, which was very much connected to our food and our medicine and the way we were connected to our sexuality in a healthy way, and the goddess culture, so it's making me think too of like the belly. Like I've been learning more about like what happened in Ukraine in like after World War I, and there was actually a fake famine that was created. Like the farmer the farmers had their land taken away, so there was an actual famine that was created by Stalin, by like the Soviet regime. And so if you think about that, like land being taken away, places of worship being taken away, our connection to our very own medicine, our connection to our owning our sexuality, reproductive rights, right? Like reproductive rights being taken away. Like these things are all connected and they're in our body. And probably like the pelvic core is like the deepest place, right? So it's almost like where you're describing when you're having these moments of rapture, these samskaras, these little places where we've all had accumulated energy or traumas, they get moved, and sometimes you feel that in a cathartic experience of dance or on your massage table, right? Someone's working on you and you have a catharsis. And so I think we have to somehow come to this basic remembrance that we have the same oppressor. Like and yes, like our situations have all been different, but it's in the remembrance that we're actually going to remember that the our elders have held these teachings. And yeah, so I don't know, I'm kind of riffing on it, but yeah, I see the connection between the most important things: our food, our places of worship, the way we connect to our bodies, our sovereignty, our body sovereignty. Those are the things that are being severed, and it's at the root, right? So it's going to affect everything. It's going to affect our sexuality. And I think the last thing I'm going to say about that is that I think that's why the sexuality piece is almost like one of the most powerful, because it's like right there. It's like right at the root. And it's like, how can you have the audacity to experience pleasure, like even in even in the breakdown? It's like, if you could experience pleasure in that moment, like they can't get to you, right? Because you're like, you're one, you feel the oneness. And I guess I just having this image, I've been like, watching these images of people that are like having their baby in a bomb shelter or playing music, and even just the soldiers, they're young men, young women who young two spirits, who don't know if they're going to live to see the next day, but they're smiling and they're laughing, and they're experiencing victory and joy. And I think that's why people are saying there's no way Ukraine's going to lose, right? Because there's no way we're going to lose that joy. Like even if you're destroyed, like if you can have that, if they can't take that from you, you can't, you know.
Hmm.
Dang, it's like
So
it's
rich. There's so much to say. I mean, this reminds me in May last year when Gaza was bombed, just the images of people playing the piano on the rubble, and just the human spirit, and also the longing of life for itself. There was so much you said that stirred so much in me. And this is a very personal memory, but I am comfortable sharing it, is when my partner's mother passed away. My most poignant memory of that day was his need to be in a sexual space with me to actually let go of his pain. And
so
just
beautiful.
like how much of our animal self needs connection. And that this conversation for me, like, overall, an umbrella. It's really about compassion, you know? And I think that when you speak about the media representing one issue and not another necessarily, one of the way to flip this that is so interesting is when we don't see much, we are suddenly overwhelmed when we see something. And that
Mhm.
as a society, there isn't always a lot of training on how to be with grief and how to be with really painful things. And so there's been so many profound treasures that you've offered just in all the storytelling around we need to learn how to be uncomfortable on behalf of each other, in support of each other. And there's so much more I could say, but I'm aware of like keeping to this river and also aware of your time. You know, one of the things you shared with me was that you'd always had a vision that you'd head back to Ukraine one day
Yes.
and be of
Yes.
service. Tell me more.
Ah, well, I've wanted to go to Ukraine. I still have family in Ukraine. I don't even know them very well. They're probably going to see this and like my video and stuff. And it's like, my family always had kind of a financial barrier. Like it was really hard to go back. And I think there was also a lot of pain, like from my mom being like, well, we got to get out of here. Like, um, but yeah, I used to always, anything I ever did, I used to do circus yoga, just a lot of kids yoga. And so I always imagined going to Ukraine and offering, that kind of, I like, even when I was doing circus work, like I love Clowns Without Borders. Like it just like warms my heart so much. And, and so what was really trippy, like happened the other day is, we're doing this PCT training and, our Vigo training, and someone shared that there's 75 orphans from Ukraine that were just safely crossed over the border to Austria. And so I thought, wow, like how synchronistic and beautiful. Maybe there's an opportunity there, for people that are watching this that want to contribute, that are like, I think I actually saw this post that was like, how do you talk to kids about war? And one of the things that was shared was like doing something with them, whether it's like an art project or, let's go read, let's donate $10, to some cause. So they feel like they're contributing to a change. And I was like, this is great for adults too. Like, I think all of us, like we want to do something that's going to look different for all of us. I'm personally praying on that myself. Like, what does that look like? Because it's not always money. Um, but I did put together, a little bit, like a few little resources for people that might really want to do something, but might feel kind of inundated or overwhelmed with all of the different options. And so one of them is, this group of people that they just, moved these orphans. They're basically starting a new orphanage in Austria. They are providing, clothing and shoes. Like they just used some of the money and they just went to the mall and got the kids all new shoes and clothing. So, this is like going to a group, because sometimes you just don't know, right? Like if where the money is going. And so they're going to be establishing, they're going to be using some money to hire an attorney to like figure out how to get these kids to homes and things like that. Because the Ukrainian ministry is actually very cautious. Like they don't want the kids to just disappear since there's so much going on in the world with child trafficking. So even families that have been like trying to adopt these kids can't even have them. So the support for, helping them, tend to them, create whatever kind of situation can stabilize their lives until they come through. But what I did, because, again, I want to, give people an option, I kind of created a Google Doc with other options. So I thought maybe I can share that link. And then there's a couple of other organizations. There's also a Palestinian organization that works specifically with, uh, it's funny, I'm spacing out the word, but this is another interesting inequality. There's all of these interesting videos of like Ukrainian kids crossing the border, and 3 days later they're like in a school in Spain. Meanwhile, there's still a lot of kids, from Gaza and Palestine that are still living in refugee camps for like the past 7 years. And so there's an organization that I listed that is working to improve the conditions in refugee camps and things like that. So I'm going to share the link and then I'm going to keep adding to it, and if other people have suggestions, they're welcome to like reach out to me and tell me more. But I just thought that was really interesting that this like really hits really close to home. And I, when this started happening, I was like, I am going to go to Ukraine and I'm going to help now. Now I understand. Like, I'll never see the Ukraine that I thought I would one day, but I'm going to get to be a part of that beautiful rebuilding process. So that's what I would personally want to do, is like go, Um, so yeah, that's a little bit about kind of what I put together. If people are really wanting to help and just need a little bit of support, finding the right place to put their support.
Mm, thank you for doing that. And I'll definitely link that under the video and link it in the email and all the places that we share this. And I think living documents like that can be so amazing and so powerful. So thank you. And when you speak about this vision of I'll never go back to that Ukraine, but I'll be part of the healing and the rebuilding, I get excited and I get humbled, and then I go like, well, how can everything you've been learning like help? So the whispering of the prayers and the plants and the prayers and the womb work, etc. It's fascinating. It's like, who will you give all that to? And the places it's most needed. So just a blessing to you and your journey, and everyone who's healing their own ancestries. And it takes individuals.
Yeah, and it often starts with, like, here, right? Like, it starts like we have to get healthy enough and resourced enough that we can actually say, I have something to give, and that sometimes takes some time. So for anyone on that personal journey, that is so important, like that's the best thing we can do, is show up for ourselves so that we can be resourced enough to even have the headspace to do anything else for anyone else.
And even that sentiment is a deep reclamation of the feminine, because the feminine can't actually feed a child with an empty breast. Like, it doesn't work. If we look at all of the healing traditions, that postpartum period, the deep nourishment, like after a fracture, after a rupture, after a volcano, whatever that is, that moment that new life is coming through the death of the old, that's when you feed. And so
Right.
the invitation for people to deeply resource really confronts the places we haven't been allowed to feed ourselves.
Absolutely. It's like the most counterculture thing, because the patriarchy and white supremacist culture wants us to override constantly our bodies. And there's no way we're ever going to find pleasure, right, when we're like totally depleted and don't have anything to give. So just that act alone is extremely, it's like the act of resistance.
Really powerful. I'm wondering if there's a prayer or a blessing, or even if it's not in your ancestral language, but if there's something from your homeland that you want to offer people as a way to close this call and to honor the profound conversations that we've had, it would be such an honor to receive.
I would love that. Yes, thank you. I will share a prayer. And again, I speak Russian. I know a little bit of Ukrainian. I'm learning it. So what I'm going to do is just say a prayer like I normally would say a prayer, which sometimes is English, Spanish, but I'm going to incorporate some words in Russian and Ukrainian, and we'll just kind of, yeah, we'll pray this out. I'm going to light a little bit of herbs here. Okay. So I just want to start by saying thank you. In Ukrainian, that's "дякую," and in Russian, that's "спасибо." Thank you, Great Spirit, Creator, Mother, Father, God, Goddess, Creator, Creatrix, for this opportunity to pray and experience oneness. Thank you for all the support that we have. Thank you for helping us wake up. Thank you for helping us see the truth, and for your constant abundance and constant support in our lives. When we reach for you, you're there and we can feel you. Hmm. And lastly, I just want to send a prayer of love and peace and compassion to every single person right now in the world that's experiencing hardship, may they feel this support. May they feel this strength, even in the deepest moment of grief, even in the deepest moment of pain. May they feel this support of the Creator. May they feel the support of the love and appreciation in our hearts. And may they feel their humanity and their power and their beauty. Hmm. Спасибо, спасибо, спасибо. Дякую, да, дякую, дякую. Thank you, Samar.
Thank you.